So I'm here talking with Dr. Jane Halonen, who's a professor of psychology at University of West Florida. And Jane is someone I've known for many, many years. I have an enormous amount of respect for Jane as an instructor and as a human being. I wanted to just have a few words with her about the switch from in-person, face-to-face teaching to remote teaching and get a feel for what her thoughts are. So Jane, I know you've been teaching for a long time. And you've
40 years.
40 years? And you've been at a number of different institutions in the course of your career.
3.
So I'm wondering what it's been like going from the face-to-face learning that you've always done to the online remote teaching that you're doing now.
Well, it was a real challenge because we had a grand total of 4 days, count them, 4 days to make that conversion. This news of the virus and its consequence hit us smack in the middle of spring break week. So on top of that, we didn't get spring break week. But I like to say that the time that I spent trying to pivot, as we're encouraged to call it, is probably the hardest I've ever worked in higher education, trying to acquire the skills that I needed to be able to provide what I thought was a reasonably equivalent experience for my students in my 3 classes. It was really challenging. So when I heard about it, I know I probably had this expression, and then I settled down and got to work. And at least from the feedback I've gotten from my students, they've been pretty appreciative of the things that I've tried to put in place for them.
What do you think are some of the most important things to remember with this transition to remote teaching to provide the students with that quality education that we're really trying to do?
Well, I think there are actually 2 levels to that question. One is just in general, what's important about remote teaching, and secondarily, in this situation. So let me start with the second first. I always maintain opportunities for students to connect with me, drop in classes, drop in opportunities, WebEx sessions. I'm on email constantly, and I make a point to ask how they're doing. Whatever the business is that we need to transact, it's very important for me to recognize the humanity of the situation that we're facing. Boy, nobody asked for this. And I know that while some people's lives are relatively untouched by this, other than it's inconvenient, I get news from my students about they've lost family members, they've lost their jobs, their cars are gone. I mean, the array of things that I've been hearing about forces me to teach at a much more personal level. So I think that's important to identify for the corona problem.
If we were to continue with remote teaching, as most places are through the summer and even into the fall, what do you think we need to think about over the summer? Because now we're not doing it on a sort of a quick pivot, but a slower pivot. What sorts of, just 1 or 2 quick bits of advice you think we should pay attention to for the fall if we have to go that way?
Well, I think one challenge is, if we're still in this kind of circumstance, trying to take advantage of doing things that can be uploaded and managed on students' own time, not trying to coordinate things for synchronous cooperation. I know I've been entertained by some of the conversations I've seen on Facebook about how do I get my students to do this? How do I keep them from cheating? How do I force them to participate in group discussions? Like, come on, folks, this is our students are maybe in crisis mode. So what the best thing we can do is to create a good supportive infrastructure in our courses and let students know that we're behind them and that we think that they're going to be able to succeed in whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. I have to say too, one of the things that surprised me is the number of students who've offered to go buy my groceries because they know I'm one of those target people who should be staying home. And so the fact that I'm engaging with them more personally means they're engaging with me more personally too. And I have to say that's a kind of pleasant outcome that I have been surprised by. With regard to getting ready for the fall, I'm anticipating that I'll be teaching 3 classes online in the fall. Yeah, it means I'll be able to do that in a more leisurely fashion. But I think if what we're trying to do is create a learning community, it's what I try to do face to face, then it simply means you use the resources that you have available in different ways. you convene groups of people and put them in small groups and make them responsible for certain parts of what you're asking them to do, and make them accountable. When my students are doing presentations, they must respond to student presentations by coming up with good multiple choice questions to demonstrate that they heard the key points. And relatively easy for me to check to see if they've been paying attention. I love the fact that in Canvas, I have analytics that show me who's on point, who's not on point. I can use that to manage and move around bonus points. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable about the environment, despite the fact that I was a relative stranger to the Panopto world before all this happened. So I do think it means reconceptualizing, and frankly, that'll be good for me, because I think we need to throw out what we do every 3 years anyway. It's just a challenge to do it all at once.